Hi everyone, Heather here with Astrology with Heather.com, and I am back with another special video. And today I have with me Chriselda Pacheco, who's a good friend of mine. She's a Hermeticist and a consecrated Gnostic Priestess. She does really powerful work with women, and she's here today to talk to us about the planetary initiation periods, these major cycles in our lives that we all go through at certain periods of time because of the planetary energies. And we're specifically going to be focusing today on the midlife transits, which are something I get so many questions about. So welcome, Chriselda. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm really excited to be here with you, Heather. Yeah, really good stuff.
Yeah. And so for those who aren't familiar with your work, I know you've been on my channel before, you've done some videos in my cosmic community, but for those who are new, if you could just give like a 5-minute rundown of who you are, where you came from, and what you're doing now, that would be super helpful.
Right. It's like where to start, right? Especially for all the women out there watching who are in approaching their midlife, like where do you start, right? To tell your story about how you are, what you are now. It all started so long ago. Um, but so basically what I do with women is, okay, my background is, my direct experience background is, and to me that's very important to talk about whenever we are doing work on uncovering things. I really want to know what has been your direct experience with trauma. When I talk about them as initiations, and we'll get into that. But my background experience, and a lot of people might know this who have watched our videos, is that I was a sex worker for 20 years. I did get a degree in English and journalism, and I was over at Mother Jones magazine, in fact, in San Francisco. Some people might know what that magazine is. And I was an intern there, and then I was an editorial intern, and then a fellow. But I was doing that for free full time. Which, yay, in San Francisco is ridiculous. So
Yeah.
I was like, well, what job can I do that can help me be able to afford to do this for free full time, Monday through Friday in San Francisco, and also eat and not live under a bridge. Well, it turned out to be stripping. I started stripping at the Larry Flint's Hustler Club in San Francisco. That was my first experience in that underground world, and it literally is a club underground. And after that, I decided that juxtaposition of the experience of living underground and working underground, coming above ground to work at that magazine, I saw the juxtaposition of what felt more real and wasn't real. And I wanted to remain myself. And so I made a conscious decision to stay underground. And I kept working as a stripper for almost 20 years. And then I started to do dominatrix work and things like that. So yeah, living life behind the veils has been what has initiated me, in a lot of ways. Before that, I was the scapegoat of my whole family. There's probably a lot of people that might relate to the scapegoatism there as well. And so it helped me be able to sort of navigate my way through. Can you imagine, strippers are scapegoats too, right? So we have to hold the shame for everybody. This is the way that it is. So interesting, I've had several initiations throughout my life through the direct experience, which to me is very important. And the work I do, and the Hermetic work I do, because the direct experience is really is what informs us for real. When we experience those things with our own bodies, with our own actions, it has a deeper meaning to it than just intellectualizing this, or watching from the outside and observing it, from the outside. So that's what I do with women, is help them look to see where, like with a fine-tooth comb, using the 7 Hermetic principles, where it is that we are still applying this false morality, these values of morality, which are constructed, rooted in the church, how that morality has sort of ruined, the laws of nature in our minds. They've veiled the laws of nature that, this morality does not exist in nature. So we have to return to what is this original truth versus this moral truth that hides in plain sight, that has just been infiltrated, right, in everything in our culture. So that's in essence what I do. That's in essence part of, the direct experience I've come from, and how I use that to synthesize everything in the work I do for women and with women.
Okay, yeah. So that's that's a
Yeah,
lot of stuff right there. Um,
right.
and so for those who are not super familiar with Hermeticism and the 7 Hermetic principles, which is kind of what our talk is going to be rooted in. Of course, we'll give a little brief overview, but we actually did a full 45-minute video on the 7 Hermetic principles and the way that you utilize them to help people work through trauma, to, harness those experiences, to go through those initiations. And so you can find that in the Cosmic community. There's actually, I'm doing a 7-day free trial membership. So you can go over to the Cosmic community, sign in, and watch this video completely free. And it's so much valuable information. So I highly recommend that you do that. And we're also going to be really discussing these astrological convergence periods where we have a lot of different planetary cycles that meet and interrelate at the same time to create these big major milestones in your life that usually create at least some sort of crises or some sort of period of change and transformation. And the biggest ones people know about are that Saturn return period, which is actually a convergence of 5 different major planetary cycles all at once, and also the midlife crisis period, which is a convergence of 8 different planetary cycles all at once, in addition to the maturation period of the north and south nodes. This is also something that we talk about in the Cosmic community. I have a video for each stage of life and those major convergences of these major cycles. So again, the link to sign up for your 7-day free trial is down in the description below. So you can find that there if you want a little bit more information about midlife or any stage that you're in. But let's kind of get into this energy of these cycles, because I mean, really, when we're connecting with these cycles, we're connecting with the natural rhythms and cycles of nature, right? And you always say nature is the truth.
Right.
And so that's powerful, right? To kind of view it in this way, that we're connecting with something that is so natural and so innate and so ingrained in us as humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is this original truth, is I feel like in order for us to understand what balance is and how we can learn to identify what's really going on around here, it's like I feel like we've reached a peak in human time right now that is asking us to go back to the basics. What is just the basic outside of culture, right? And Terence McKenna talks about this. He talks about that the shaman has learned how to observe culture from outside of culture, right? And so
Terence McKenna, born in where?
Right. Right.
Got a lot of Terence McKenna energy over here.
Right. It's better than those wizards that were over in the desert, though. I remember that. But anyway, so he says that, and it's true. He came to see that by taking a lot of psychedelics, right, and asking these questions. Because the culture we're living in, is that really the truth, or is it's a construction, right, of truths? And what are these truths really doing for us? Are they helping to maintain a certain order, a certain status quo? But we don't know it sometimes because this is all we've known. This is the only frame that we know. What happens if we go outside the frame and observe that frame? And so what I'm saying is, like, we realize we're not living in natural truth. We've constructed our culture around this moral truth that has been, infiltrated inside of everything. That's what colonization is. It's beyond just taking the land, it's taking the mind, right? Pulling it out from the natural original truth of what it knows, the blueprint of everything that's within us. And so, I also say nature is the Messiah, because I feel like that's what time it is too, is that this return of original truth, the return of the very opposite of this moralization we have been living in, which creates a lot of shame, right? And this shame is so unconscious sometimes, and it is passed down to us through our families, intergenerationally, and this has created a lot of collateral damage in the world. And so nature is the Messiah, is for original truth is the Messiah, so that we can return there, and then from there be able to see where to go next, because that's that's rooted back in integrity, right? Natural truth that cannot be argued. We cannot say, oh, I don't like the sun, and it's still going to rise anyway. I mean, some things are going to be what they are, whether we like it or believe in it or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of going back to the astrological component of this, and the 7 Hermetic principles, right?
Right.
Part of our nature as humans is this interaction between not just what's going on here on Earth, but the celestial omens, the celestial configurations, the planetary alignments, the sun and the moon, which have a very direct, physical, observable impact on us. And so that's kind of what we're getting at here with these astrological initiation periods, right? We're reconnecting with our true nature, which is inherently connected to what's going on up there in the sky, in the planets, in our solar system, as above, so below, which is one of the 7 Hermetic principles, right?
Yeah, that's the law of correspondence.
Yeah.
To be able to observe the phenomena as best as we can, through ancient science like astrology, and understand that these planets are moving around, and these things are happening in the cosmos, but we are all made of the same material. We are all made of the same raw material. And that's part of what colonization has done, unfortunately, is what that has done is it's kind of centered mankind, right? And in doing that, it creates this narcissism, and that narcissism has forced, us to sort of feel like we're above nature. And so what that has happened is it's disconnected us from actually our true nature. And then we're floating in this existential, this space, unrooted in the earth, when we have forgotten the earth. And when we forget the earth, we forget the sky, because it's all an organic truth. It's all an organic system.
And that's like the thing. That's why people are so fearful of things like astrology, because it shows you that you are not the ultimate,
Right.
God of control of everything that's going on in your life. There are external influences that you have absolutely no control over. This is the study of the convergence of fate and free will. And sometimes fate, has more power than free will. And sometimes the natural law, nature, has more power than your own free will. And so many people are so uncomfortable with that, especially when they come from certain doctrines like Christianity and things like that, which center it on like, this is man's kingdom. And, we have stewardship over all of this. So we have control, right? This actually kind of takes some control away from us. And these planetary cycles, these convergence moments also they represent these periods of time where it feels like control is being taken away from us, because so much is happening that was already set in motion at the time of our birth, and it converges all at this exact point in time. And so we have these major periods. One of them is early teens, around 14, 15, that time period. Another one, the big one, is that Saturn return that we mentioned before. And then we have this midlife, which is one of the biggest ones, because there's so many convergences happening at the same time. And it feels like so many things are like up for change and out of our control. And it's like, it's all just happening.
Right. I really love that you brought that up. One of my students, she talked about, she feels like she has to control everything. And I really do understand that. I mean, this is crazy. I mean, we're, everything around us is who knows, right? I mean, I told her, remember, all there is chaos. That's it. And so everything that you see around us, buildings, the systems we created, are attempts to order the chaos, not to get rid of it. It's still there. Any minute now, lightning can strike something. There's all kinds of unbridled forces surrounding us. And so when we learn to accept that, and let go and realize we can't control the lightning where it's going to strike, we can't. So it's like, when can we just finally accept this? Do we have to mourn that that's true instead of what we might have thought was true? And that's what initiations are. It's like things and occurrences in our lives that happen. The death of a loved one for the first time is a shocking experience. It is a shocking experience, because it reminds us that we are mortal, especially if it happens to people when they're young, and then they lose someone they love so much, so young, versus as they get older, their parent ages, and then they finally lose a parent, right? It seems more natural, but sometimes these unnatural deaths are something that's a result of bad timing or bad placement somewhere, things like that. The sudden loss is an initiation, because something happened you couldn't control, right? You can't control your parents aging either. You can't control them getting sick, or, you can try to be supportive. So when the convergence of all these things happen, it creates like an earthquake in the life of people, right?
Mhm.
And you can't control it. So these are forms of initiations that are forcing us to remember we are not in control after all, you know?
That was so beautifully put. I love it.
Oh,
And
good.
it doesn't even have to be obviously like a physical death, just to kind of point that out. It could be like something that's beyond your control, like you get laid off and you lost a job and that job was your identity, right? It's a stripping away, not just of control, but a control over who you actually are, because that's what you think you have the most control over. But when you tie your identity to these things that are not actually you, like
Yes.
that is a huge, like ripping away, a huge moment of initiation.
And, you know, this happens, and this is one thing that's been happening a lot the past several weeks, especially. I mean, this has constantly been what happens in my life. Women like this reaching out to me, but recently it seems like it's really intense. This after being married 25 years to somebody, they find out that their husband was living a secret life, you
Yeah.
know, doing something else, and so that's another death. That's another
Mhm.
form of death. The shock is so profound. It forces someone into an existential crisis, right? And then they're also, if they are in their 40s when this happened, because they've been married, you know, I don't know, 25 years, 30 years, whatever, in their 50s, they're also in the middle of their croning.
Yes.
So to lose that is to lose levels of identity. At the same time, your body is changing. You're going through kind of perimenopause or a menopausal time as a woman, you know. And there's so many truths that we have forgotten about our own bodies in this own sacred process as we get older, because we are forced to live in this synthetic society that doesn't honor, you know, what is sacred. It actually profanes it. And so there's so many things that happen to women, and especially if they're now in the midst of attempting to heal from this narcissistic abuse, right? They feel discarded. They were used. They gave their best times, the best years of their lives to this person who turned out to be a whole nother person, and it makes them second guess all the decisions they've ever made. I mean, this is a real
Mhm.
shocking, traumatic time, and that's an initiation, you know?
Absolutely.
That's
And
a
even if
major,
something specific doesn't happen, like a big ordeal, like you lose your job, you lose your partner, or, you know, something like that in the 40s, like it's the Saturn opposition period. This is a time where, kind of going back to what you said before, you have to deal with your own mortality and your age, right? Your age becomes very much a central focus. And men and women deal with this very differently. I've noticed this, and we talked about this off camera. But for women, it's usually about the end of the fertile years. And even if, you know, their life was not so focused on bearing children and raising children, or if they didn't have children, it's still a coming to terms
right,
with that. Like your body's changing, you're no longer in that phase of life. And if you've devoted so much time and energy to having children and raising children, they're starting to grow up. You know, even if they're just like 4, 5, 6 years old, they're becoming more independent. You're seeing that, and you're not having more children. You're not going to have a little baby anymore. And
right,
so it's coming to terms with the fact that I've spent so much time and so much energy on this. This has become my identity. And that identity is falling away due to nature, the natural processes, the natural cycles of our bodies.
right. And it's really interesting because I lived on the other side of that coin. You know, I just turned 48 in June,
Mm-hmm.
and I chose to never have children, and
Mm-hmm.
had never been married. I'm in a relationship now that we he's pretty much my husband. But it took me my whole adult life to finally find, you know, that sort of domestic bliss, you know, with somebody else. I've been pretty wild before. So, you know, I think about that, like, well, I didn't raise any children, but I had a life of that I can't go back to. Um, you know,
Yeah.
there's a nostalgia there that I have, like for that sort of freedom and wildness, and I still can have it, just not like that anymore. I don't have the energy physically to do that anymore. I don't have a psychological, you know, I know too much. I'm afraid I might poison people at this time if I haven't all that same crap I did before, you know. There are definitely things that I'm coming to terms with that like losses, but everything comes at a cost. So if I'm losing something, I am also gaining something else. You know, that's just, you can't just lose something and then not gain something. But it's hard to imagine what that gain is if we're stuck on what it is that we have lost. Now, losing someone you love as a death, like that kind of thing is shocking. The narcissistic abuse is shocking. But at some point when we come to, after the shock of it all, there is going to be something else that reveals itself to say, here's another door, and behind this door, there's a lot of wisdom here. There's a lot of deeper understanding, to help you, so that every time these things continue to happen, you have a way to alchemize, all this raw material that you're suddenly finding yourself with whenever you hit like a rock bottom. There's a lot of raw material you're taking, investigating, and you're taking inventory of now. That before, when we're too comfortable or things are going too well or whatever, we don't really, sometimes we're not forced to do that. But these events force us, these events that come around in our lives, they force us sometimes to wave the white flag, like, man, the ego gets out of the way finally, where we can really do some real investigating and back to nature, and not the facade.
Absolutely. And like, so that midlife period too, it's like the two main events are that Saturn opposition and the Uranus opposition. And so there's this energy of a disruption. There's this energy of wanting to break free from something from our past, even if it's not happening like on its own organically. But then there's also that Saturnian energy, that opposition of Saturn, where it's a coming to terms with our limitations. And those limitations are not just due to age necessarily, but can be due to like what we've created or built for ourselves. So for you mentioned like you don't physically have the energy to do it. You can't go back to that the way that you were before. So that would be more like coming to terms with like age. But there's also this coming to terms with, I built myself this situation, right? This foundation. I shouldered these burdens. I created these responsibilities, and now I have to carry them. And, what do I do with that? Do I still want to carry these burdens? And if I absolutely have to, how do I keep going with this?
Right.
And that's a big part of this time period as well. And I personally obviously haven't gone through it yet, but you have, which is part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you about this.
Right.
So what does that look like, in the work that you do with women particularly? And then we'll kind of get into the difference with men, which is very kind of a big contrast.
Right. Oh yeah, totally. It is a whole total contrast. So the way that it looks like with women, what I do right now is, so I walk them, I help to guide them through together. They're walking down into this private hell, right? With somebody like me that says it's okay. I know it's scary. But once you look at it and once you see this is truly there, the fear goes away. It's the not knowing that's the scariest part, but you have a guide to help you through it. So what we do is we go through each of the Hermetic principles and we observe in the world where nature has been suppressed. Nature versus morality, right? And we start to now separate that spaghetti off the plate and say, oh, this is nature, this is morality, this is nature, this is morality. And all of a sudden they see the world, it reframes this reality they were forced to live and participate in. It reframes to help them see there's the original truth. This is how it was co-opted. This is how it was moralized. And as a result, where then in correspondence is that in me? You know what I mean? The spaghetti off the plate in society and the spaghetti off the plate in the self. Mm-hmm. And so I walk them through that, and we comb, like a fine-tooth comb, all through the 7 Hermetic principles to see these things behind the veils. Mm-hmm. And then, when if it becomes too much, then we take some time to talk about the dark night of the soul, the inner alchemization process of how to use that fear and that shock now to create another elixir. What does that elixir look like? It's really very personal, intimate, very detailed, and it's very sacred, to return to that, to see what has been profaned, like I said a little while ago. So in general, that is a bit of how I do it, my technique working with women one-on-one. Mm-hmm. I am going to create these into courses for self-study and do as best as I can to give them that same experience with the downloadable courses. But the one-on-one work I do is like that, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it sounds like midlife would be a powerful time for that, especially for women, because one of the things I have noticed in the work that I do as an astrologer is that for women this period, and we talked about this off camera, but for women this period does seem to be more introspective. It's more about self-evaluation. It's more psychological and more emotional than physical. Like what they're, I mean, they're going through something physical, but a lot of what's going on is like very internalized as opposed to externalized. They deal with it more internally. Whereas men, as we see in society, and as I've seen with plenty of readings, and obviously everyone in their life, I'm sure, has an example of this, they tend to externalize this period. And so they end up doing a lot of really crazy things. They'll like, I use an example in the video that I did in the cosmic community of my father who got a motorcycle when he had his midlife crisis, and we were like dead broke. It's not like we had like
Oh
money
my
to
gosh.
just throw around, but he got this like red motorcycle, and he was so happy. Though he's never done anything like that. That was like the year where he was like so nice and so happy, and I have like fond memories of him with this motorcycle. And then I'm pretty sure my mom made him sell it, but like that's a very stereotypical midlife crisis thing, getting like a fancy toy, or a fancy new wife, or a fancy something external to kind of like deal with the fact that, hey, I'm getting older. I haven't done this, that, and the other thing yet, and now I have a wife and a kids and a mortgage and taxes to pay. Like I don't necessarily want this. So men will usually do something kind of
Right.
unusual, or something that kind of rebels against whatever they've been doing before, but they have this physical manifestation, and it's very different. Women sometimes do that, but it's not as common, and it's not as extravagant usually.
Right, right. So two things I want to touch on there. The So I don't know how many people might know about Joseph Campbell.
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell, he's the guy that really is known for talking about mythology, and the importance of mythology in our lives, and throughout humanity as a way of expressing these archetypal blueprints, right? It's kind of the journey of the soul, the journey of the person, and all the different things they have to go through. And so his is the hero's journey, right? And it's really sort of like the outward, what's out there kind of in the great yonder, and the world will have to leave the home and go out and explore and do these things. There are aspects of the internal there, but it's very focused on the outward, which to me, in the law of correspondence, is the masculine, right? The outward, out there. And so what we are witnessing now in the collective is the return. People talk about the return of the divine feminine. Another thing that is the return of the heroine's journey. The heroine's journey is inward, right? And so men are also being called to sort of self-evaluate. And it's harder for them in general. Again, this is not everybody, but it's all on a spectrum, right? I mean, we all understand this. But in general, in the sort of archetypal masculine, the archetypal masculine is now being asked to self-evaluate, which is very difficult for that to do, because it's been so out of balance. It's been all about itself for a long time. It's centered itself for a long time. It's in essence, very narcissistic. So to ask something that is very narcissistic, someone who's very narcissistic, to self-evaluate is very difficult, which is what they're rebelling against on that level. Women,
and just to interject and clarify so we don't get angry comments, we're not saying that all men are narcissistic. We're talking about an archetypal energy that everybody carries to a certain extent, and some carry it to a much larger extent than others, and that's all.
Right. That's
and
all.
Not all men. I
know. The thing is, we have to be able to talk about this stuff without people getting their feelings hurt either.
I know, exactly.
I know. We have to be able to do that, because if we're going to talk about feelings, then we're never going to grow. We have to have these conversations. So yeah, I'm not talking about all men, and that's not it. It's just that there's a masculine principle that has been running the show for several thousand years now. Our entire postmodern society, right, has centered the masculine energy. It has. And it's needed to keep the feminine energy in bondage in order to continue to sort of do and exist the way it's existing. That's just true too. But I have seen, and as somebody who was a stripper for a long time, if anybody understands what it looks like when men go through their midlife stuff, I do. They used to come in all the time to those clubs, trying to reignite or make sure that they still feel that thing, around that environment too. So as a woman, the heroine's journey is definitely where I'm at this time of my life. And that's the initiation for women to return to themselves after all that life they lived, raising kids, being married. Now they're not married anymore, and or their kids are gone. And now they're with themselves. What do they do now? Who are they? And there comes a time where, you're going to go through a mourning period. You're going to feel like you sacrificed more of yourself than you had originally thought you would have to. And you go through a mourning period. There's some stages of grief that must occur during these kinds of initiations.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I feel like you covered that really nicely. I don't really have anything to add to that. Is there anything else that you want to say about this particular period? Because I know it's a coming to terms with age. There's like a lot of change going on around that time. It's also this period, like you mentioned at the start of the video, this coming to terms with the fact that nature is sometimes predominant and we don't always have control. And this is actually the time period where the north and south nodes come to maturation. And so this is a time where you have to come into this, well, it's not even like you naturally come into this understanding that there are certain things in life that you are being guided to do and certain things that you're being guided away from. And there are certain talents that you're harnessing. There's certain things that you're developing. And you start to actually find this balance between the north and south node energies, which are very much about fate. They're very much about your destiny. They're very much about your soul's evolution and what your soul came here to learn, but also to grow out of. It's like this growth energy of like on a soul level throughout many different lifetimes. And so that's something that you're naturally starting to just understand a little bit better. And when you're talking about the node energies, these are events and situations and experiences in our lives that are always beyond our control. And so that would be like another component of it. Is there anything else we didn't cover in terms of like the dynamics of this? Because there are 8 different planetary cycles. I'm not going to go into all of them. I have that in the Cosmic Community. You guys can watch that for free if you want. But anything else that you want to add?
I was thinking that, to think about the power of language. And when we talk about midlife crisis, for instance, I like to replace the word crisis with initiation, midlife initiation. Because I feel like, another thing we have to become aware of is the power of language, which is what I use when I talk about the law of vibration. When I work with people, we look at etymology of words and we look at exchanging it. In other words, the root of what we're saying is really what is going to create cause and effect. So you may as well understand and learn how to use words in a different way. And so to change from midlife crisis to midlife initiation brings back the sacred, right? It replaces the word crisis with something sacred, because it's for the soul to now be led behind the veils even further, so we can deepen our wisdom. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that about trying that out and see how that feels out there, people. Like if you feel like you're going through a midlife crisis, if you started to say midlife initiation, if that feels different, for you.
Yeah. And I mean, that is a little bit more empowering as well, as opposed to like, I'm in a crisis.
Right. It feels like a crisis, but when you think about initiation, it all of a sudden it does something, doesn't it?
Yeah. And every initiation is, born out of crisis. So,
It
yeah, they're intertwined, but definitely viewing it as more of an initiation. Like I'm being initiated into a new level of awareness, understanding, a new phase of life, a new way of being, a new way of connecting to my true nature. Like that's a very different way of framing it, as opposed to I'm having a crisis and I'm reacting to it.
That's right. It's reaction versus response. Responding, reacting, right? There's more autonomy and sovereignty in the response than there is in reaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing that we have control over too. Like when these things are happening, when we're having these major life transition periods, we don't always have control over what's going on necessarily, but we have control over the way that we respond to it. And
Right.
especially if we're aware that these things are happening, these cycles are converging, stuff is going to be changing,
Right.
you can prepare yourself to respond accordingly, and hopefully to respond to it more as an initiation and deal with it like that as opposed to a crisis.
Right. And people, I've noticed the pattern in people who have had several initiations in their lives, a lot of trauma, but who've actually done work with trauma and are working with it, uh, that they have an easier time, right, as it goes on and on, time goes on and what to do now when shit hits the fan. They've already started creating their own like template already because it's happened before, and so but they keep adding to the template that's being created. So they have those coping mechanisms that are healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of powerful stuff. I mean, this is a very powerful conversation. This is a way to bring the sacred back.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should definitely do more conversations like this. And so
Yeah.
if people want to find you and work with you, how can they do that?
Well, I have a website, ChriseldaPacheco.com. You can write me from the website. You can also find me on Instagram. I think I'm the only Chriselda Pacheco on there. Lucky me. So probably those two places are going to be the best to find me. I try my best to post as much as I can, but I'm in the middle of writing that book and creating these courses. So it's a little overwhelming, but I'm definitely somebody that will respond to messages. So
Okay, cool. So yeah, send Chriselda a message. Find her at ChriseldaPacheco.com. Again, you can also find our previous interview where we go deep into all of the 7 Hermetic principles and how to utilize them in a very practical way almost in your life to integrate all of these different experiences. And so you can find that down in the description below at the Cosmic Community. Again, you'll get a 7-day free trial membership, no strings attached. And so you can have access to that and all of the other wonderful content that we produce in the Cosmic Community. And yeah, I'll see you next time, Chriselda. We'll definitely have to do this again.
yeah, for sure. Thank you.
All right,
Bye.
bye. Bye, everyone.